Before the race, before the grind, before the meters ruled the mind, there were legends carved in flame, blood and honor, loss and name. From shattered worlds and ancient scars, titans, kings, forgotten wars, every zone a tale to tell, every fall a reason fell. This isn't just a game we play, these stories never fade away. So raise your love, hear the call, from Stormwind's gates to Orgrimmar's wall. This is history, fire and frost, heroes risen, heroes lost. Tonight we walk where legends stand, page by page across the land. Sit back, breathe deep, the tale begins, the echoes of Azeroth within. Old gods whisper, light still burns, every choice the wheel returns. Villains crowned and saints undone, every war thinks it's the last one. Steel may break and banners fall, but memory outlives it all. From farmer's son to chosen blade, every myth was someone made. Stay a while and hear it true. The past still speaks to me and you. So raise your voice, hear the call, from Stormwind's gates to Orgrimmar's walls. This is history, fire and frost, heroes risen, heroes lost. Tonight we walk where legends stand, page by page across the land. Sit back, breathe deep, the tale begins, the echoes of Azeroth within. Not loot, not levels, but the stories we carried here. So gather round, both old and new, these legends still remember you. Every saga, every scar, every road led here so far. This is more than pixels lost, this is blood and hope and cost. Welcome friends, your seat is set, the lore is far from over yet. The world remembers. The world remembers. The world remembers.
Hello everybody, I'm King Korppi, and welcome to Dad Squad's Gaming, the lore of World of Warcraft. We're going to jump right into it. Be sure to hit that follow button if you're new. Down below there's also our panel for the Discord. You can check out everything we have going on there. And we're going to start this off by reading the Song of the Earth Mother. Before the plains had name, where Thunder Bluff rose above the clouds, before Kodo hooves pressed into the tall grass of Mulgore, there was only the Earth Mother. She walked a young world. The land was wild then, untamed stone, roaring seas, skies that did not yet know peace. The mountains stood jagged and proud. The rivers ran fierce without memory. The world had power, but not harmony. And the Earth Mother saw this. She knelt upon the soil, and with her great hands she shaped the land. She smoothed the plains where her fingers passed. She steadied the mountains, quieted the rivers so that life might one day gather beside them. But even in her strength, she knew something was missing. The world had form. It did not yet have spirit. So the Earth Mother reached into her own heart and drew forth two lights. From her right eye she formed Anshi, the sun, blazing, relentless, strong. Anshi would bring warmth, growth, endurance, the courage to stand. From her left eye she formed Musha, the moon. Calm, watchful, patient, Musha would bring wisdom, guidance, reflection, the courage to listen. Together they circled the sky, brother and sister, day and night, strength and serenity, forever bound in balance. And still the Earth Mother was not finished. She walked the plains she had shaped and saw that they were empty. So she placed her hand upon the soil once more, and from living earth she raised her children. Tall, broad-shouldered, strong as the hills, steady as the rivers. She gave them horns like the crescent of Musha. She gave them eyes that could see across the plains. She gave them hearts that beat in rhythm with the land. These were her first children, the Shuhalo, Tauren. She did not command them to conquer. She did not command them to rule. She taught them to walk, to follow the Kodo across the grasslands, to listen to the wind, to take only what was needed, to remember what strength without balance to remember that strength without balance becomes destruction. But even gods cannot prevent sorrow. The Earth Mother saw darkness creeping in at the edges of the world. Reaches of hunger and chaos stirred beneath the soil and beyond the horizon. And though her children were strong, they were not invincible. She did something that would define them forever. She did not shield them from struggle. She taught them endurance. She whispered into their spirits that hardship would come, and that survival would not be found in rage, but in unity. Not in conquest, but in harmony. Then, as ages turned, and the world grew older, the Earth Mother began to fade from direct sight. Some say she left the world entirely. Some say she became the land itself. Some say she lived in the winds that moved the plains. But her children remember. They remember Anshi rising with warmth each morning. They remember Musha watching softly in the night. They remember that the earth beneath their hooves is not territory, it is sacred. And when the centaur came, violent, relentless, seeking domination, the Tauren did not abandon her teachings. Even as they were pushed, scattered, hunted, they endured. Because endurance is sacred. Because balance must be preserved. Because the Earth Mother's first lesson was not how to fight, it was how to survive without losing oneself. And when, generations later, strangers from another shadow world came to the plains, green-skinned, battle-worn, haunted by corruption, the Tauren did not see monsters first. They saw a people searching for balance. They saw a people who had forgotten the Earth Mother's lesson. And so the Shuhalo did what they had always done. They endured, they listened, and they chose alliance, not out of fear, but because they believed the world could be studied. Just as the Earth Mother once studied, just as the Earth Mother once steadied it with her own hands. Tonight, we speak of her children, the Tauren, and how their quiet strength reshaped the Horde. So, the Tauren, classic era Tauren. When we talk about Horde in classic World of Warcraft, we often start with Iron and Dust, much like we talked about last week with Orgrimmar and the week before that with Durotar. We start with Durotar, with spikes and stones, with the memory of demonic corruption and exile. But if Orgrimmar is the body of the Horde, the Tauren are its breath. They are older than Horde, older than Orgrimmar, older than the Orcs' arrival on Azeroth. To understand the Tauren in classic WoW, we have to step away from the canyon walls and walk west into the rolling plains of Kalimdor, into the windswept grasses of Mulgore, into a culture that measures strength differently. Because the Tauren were not conquerors. They were never conquerors. They were survivors of a different kind. Long before the Orcs arrived in Kalimdor, the Tauren were a nomadic people. They roamed the vast central plains, following the Kodo herds, living in harmony with the land. They did not build cities of stone. They built camps of hide and wood, structures meant to move when the seasons changed. Their wealth was not measured in territory, but in balance. The Tauren worldview is inseparable from their reverence for the Earth Mother. In classic lore, this belief is not abstract, it is foundational. The Earth Mother represented duality, sunlight and moonlight, life and rest, endurance and change. Everything the Tauren do, from hunting to storytelling, is governance. It is framed within that balance. For generations, the Tauren tribes were harassed by the Centaur, violent, expansionist, and relentless. The Centaur did not share the Tauren reverence for balance. They expanded aggressively across the plains, pushing the Tauren further and further toward extinction. What was everybody's first, time seeing Mulgore? Like, it was so much different than starting out in the Valley of Trials as a Tauren or as an orc or a troll. It was nice. It was peaceful. The Quillboar were there, of course, because they're Quillboar. When we met the Tauren in Classic WoW, we met them at a turning point. They were not at their height. They're not a dominant civilization. They are people on the edge of being overrun. And that context shapes everything that follows. The Tauren were not always unified under one banner. In the ancient past, they were organized into tribes, loose cultural groupings bound by kinship, hunting grounds, and shared oral tradition. The most prominent of these in classic lore is the Bloodhoof tribe, led by Karn Bloodhoof. Karn is not a warlord in the orcish sense. He's not defined by conquest. He's defined by steadiness. He is calm, thoughtful, deeply spiritual. His authority comes not from fear, but from trust. When the Centaur threat intensified, Karn became more than just a tribal chieftain. He became a figure capable of unifying scattered Tauren groups. But unification did not come through domination. It came through necessity. The tribes faced annihilation if they remained divided. Much like, the orcs would have broken apart even more had Thrall not brought them all together while they were in those internment camps. And this is where fate intersects with history. During the events of Warcraft 3, that the lead into Classic WoW, Thrall and the Orcs arrive in Kalimdor. They encounter the Tauren while the Tauren are actively under siege by Centaur forces. The first meeting is critical. The Orcs do not conquer the Tauren, they aid them. Thrall helps Karn defend his people. The Centaur push back. For the first time in years, the Tauren glimpse survival beyond constant retreat. The alliance that forms is not of subjection. It is of gratitude and shared values. Thrall sees in the Tauren something the Horde desperately needs: spiritual grounding. The Tauren see in Thrall's Horde something they desperately need: military support and stability. That alliance leads to one of the most important developments in Tauren history: the founding of Thunder Bluff. Thunder Bluff is not built in the style of Orgrimmar. It is elevated atop great mesas in Mulgore. Connected by rope bridges and lifts, its location is symbolic and strategic. High ground provides protection, isolation provides clarity. But more than that, Thunder Bluff is a declaration. They are anchoring. And, this is a big deal for a nomadic civilization. They're finally picking a place to settle down and develop their culture even more, unified under that one tribe. It's a big deal. For generations, Tauren identity was nomadic. Movement was survival. To settle permanently is to accept vulnerability, but also to accept hope. Thunder Bluff becomes the spiritual capital of the Tauren society. It houses elders, shamans, druids. It becomes a place where oral histories are preserved, where the Earth Mother is honored openly, and where tradition is stabilized rather than constantly carried. But the Tauren are not a monolith. Beyond the Bloodhoof tribe, there are other tribes whose identities matter in Classic Era understanding. The Rune Totem tribe is particularly significant. They're known for their druidic traditions and spiritual scholarships. Amul Rune Totem, a key Tauren druid in Classic, studies under the Night Elves and helps reintroduce structured druidism to Tauren society. This is monumental It means Tauren culture is evolving, not abandoning tradition, but expanding it. The Grim Totem tribe, however, presents a darker contrast. Even in Classic, they're more aggressive, more rigid, less inclined toward cooperation. When they get openly hostile in the way that they later become, their presence reminds us that Tauren unity is not absolute. There are internal tensions, there are disagreements about tradition, strength, and adaptation, and this is important because it means that Tauren society is alive. Now let's talk about why the Tauren formally joined the Horde. It's not conquest, it was not fear, it was alignment. Thrall's vision of the Horde in Classic emphasizes honor, spiritual renewal, and restraint after corruption, and we've talked about those. Those values resonate deeply with Karn. The Tauren do not need conquest, they need security. The Horde does not need more aggression, it needs balance. And the Tauren bring that balance. They temper the orcs, they influence policy, and they reinforce the importance of the elements of the land. In many ways, the Tauren serve as the conscience of early Horde. Without them, the Horde risks reverting to militaristic identity alone. And we've said, Thrall didn't want that. He didn't want his Horde to go back to what it was after entering the Dark Portal. With them, the Horde becomes something more nuanced. In Classic, this is reflected subtly but powerfully in the way Thunderbluff feels compared to Orgrimmar. And like I said, we walked around Orgrimmar last time. Thunderbluff is open. It's on top of mesas. You have rope bridges connecting, like I said earlier, the different mesas and the different rises. Thunderbluff feels open, airy, and spiritual. Orgrimmar feels fortified, defensive, and watchful. Together they form duality, body and spirit, iron and earth, strength and wisdom. The Tauren do not seek dominance over Kalimdor. They seek coexistence, which is much like Thrall wants to do. Thrall could have wiped out the Quillbore with his orcs, or the centaur that were plaguing him. He didn't. Their hunters respect the land, their druids heal it, their shamans commune with it. They understand survival not as victory, but as continuity. And that mindset reshapes the Horde. In Classic, before later wars and ideological fractures, the Horde feels steadier because the Tauren stand with it. Karn Bloodhoof, in particular, embodies this stability. He does not shout, he does not posture, he listens, he advises. He represents an elder's patience within the faction, often defined by warriors. And this is why Tauren matters so much in the Classic era. They're not the loudest members of the Horde, by far. They're the grounding force. They are proof that strength does not require fury. They are a reminder that unity can be built through shared need and shared respect. When you stand in Mulgorn Classic WoW, watching the wind move through the golden grass, hearing the distant drums, seeing Kodo wander the plains. You're seeing a culture that survived without losing itself. And that culture chose to join the Horde. It did not disappear into it, it changed it. The Tauren did not become orcs. The Horde became something broader. In Classic, that balance still holds. And that is what makes this moment in Tauren history so powerful. They're not yet fractured by internal rebellion. They're not yet defined by tragedy. They're unified, anchored, and hopeful. They have found allies who respect them. They have secured a homeland atop the mesas. They have reconnected to ancient Druidic tradition. And they helped redefine what the Horde can be. Not just a war machine, but a coalition. Not just survivors of corruption, but guardians of balance. The Tauren in Classic WoW represent a quiet triumph. Not over enemies, but over extinction. And sometimes that's the greater victory. Now we're going to dive a little deeper into the different tribes. Gotta pull up my notes, sorry. Alright, so there's a bunch of different tribes. We only mentioned 3 major ones. You got the Bloodhoof, the Rune Totem, and the Grim Totem. We'll talk a little bit about the Stonehoof tribes, the Sky Chaser tribes, the Wildmane tribes, the Winterhoof tribes, and maybe some smaller nomadic clans. So the Bloodhoof tribe Karn comes from are the unifiers. You know, their leader is Karn Bloodhoof. Their role in Classic was political and cultural center of Tauren society. Excuse me. The Bloodhoof tribe is the spine of modern Tauren identity in Classic WoW. Before unification, the Bloodhoof were nomadic hunters on the Central Plains. What set them apart wasn't raw strength, it was steadiness. Karn Bloodhoof became the rallying figure during the Centaur Wars because he embodied calm under pressure. He did not seek dominance over other tribes, he sought survival for all. When the Centaur nearly eradicated scattered Tauren camps, it was the Bloodhoof who coordinated large-scale defense and migration. They were the tribe most willing to consolidate. After Thrall aided them against the Centaur, it was the Bloodhoof who formalized the alliance with the Horde. Some of the key traits in that were traditionalist but adaptable, strong reverence for the Earth Mother, they were politically stabilizing, and they were coalition-minded. In Classic, the Bloodhoof represented unity. They're the reason the Tauren have a capital rather than camps. Without them, there's no Thunder Bluff. The next tribe we're going to talk a little bit more about is the Rune Totem tribe. The notable figure being Hamal Rune Totem, and his role was a spiritual leader, and he brought the Druidic revival. The Rune Totem tribe is critical to understanding Tauren evolution Classic. Historically, Tauren spirituality centered on shamanism and Earth Mother reverence, but structured Druidism particularly the Cenarian Circle teachings, re-entered Tauren society through the Rune Totem. Historically, Tauren Hamal Rune Totem trained under Night Elf Druids and brought those teachings back to Thunderbluff. And this is a monumental classic timeline thing. So it means Tauren are expanding spiritually. They're not stagnant traditionalists. They're open to learning from former strangers. The Rune Totem tribe bridges two worlds: ancient Tauren spirituality and structured druidic magic. They influence healing practices, natural preservation, and they're the diplomatic tone within the Horde. Without the Rune Totem, Tauren culture might remain purely shamanistic. With them, it becomes layered and adaptive. The Grim Totem tribe. They're the hardliners, Their ideological tension with it. Their role is ideological tension within the Tauren society. In Classic, the Grim Totem are not yet openly treacherous, but the tension is visible. And I think you run into some of them in Mulgore. I don't remember the quest 100%, but they're more militant. Sorry. Text message. Hold on. They're more militant. They're less patient. They're less trusting of outsiders. They're more rigid in tribal hierarchy. They believe Tauren's strength should not be diluted by compromise. Where the Bloodhoof preach unity, the Grim Totem question vulnerability. Where Karn sees alliances with the Horde as necessary and honorable, Grim Totem voices see risk. And in Classic, they are part of the Tauren society. They're not yet fractured from it. That comes later. They're not, but they represent internal ideological stress. They're the tribe most likely to argue that Tauren should rely on themselves. This tension adds realism to Tauren unity. It shows that unification is not effortless. The next one we're going to talk about, we didn't mention before, is the Stonehoof tribe. They're the Enduring Wanderers. The Stonehoof are among the more traditional nomadic tribes. They're known for resilience and physical endurance. Culturally, they're deeply tied to the plains hunting. They're conservative in adapting to settlement, and they're skeptical of permanent cities at first. For tribes like the Stonehoof, settling in Thunderbluff represented a cultural shift. They valued mobility, and settling meant vulnerability. I mean, I'm sure our ancestors felt the same way at first. Having to settling after being so nomadic for so long, it felt vulnerable. Their integration into central Tauren society reflects trust in Karn's leadership more than the eagerness to urbanization, more than their eagerness for urbanization. They embodied endurance, traditional plains survival, and conservative caution. The next tribe we're going to talk about a little bit is the Sky Chaser tribe. They were the Watchers of the Horizon. The Sky Chasers are associated with vision, hunting skills, and long-distance scouting traditions. They value observation, patience, and reading signs in the wind. In the classic context, tribes like the Sky Chasers are essential to understanding how Tauren survived the Centaur threat as long as they did. They were not conquerors, they were trackers. Their skill set influenced early warning systems, plains navigation, and defensive migration patterns. They represented a Tauren culture based on awareness rather than aggression. I don't believe we run into too many of them in Mulgore questing classic. Like I said, it's been a while since I've actually done the starting area. Then we have the Wildmane tribe. They're the fierce traditionalists. The Wildmane are known for physical prowess and more aggressive hunting traditions. They respect strength, but within the Earth Mother's balance. In Classic Era, the understanding is that they align more naturally with Horde warriors. They're comfortable alongside orcs, but they don't abandon the Tauren restraint. They represent a bridge between the Tauren calm and the Horde martial culture. Then we have the Winterhoof tribe. They're the northern survivors. The Winterhoof traditionally ranged colder regions before consolidating under the Bloodhoof unity. They valued hardship survival, environmental adaptability, community reliance, and their perspective reinforced the necessity of unity during the Centaur Wars. They understood. Can't talk tonight, chat. They understood scarcity, and that's one of the things that the Horde Thrall's orcs knew. They were practicing that scarcity and that overabundance wasn't good. Some of the minor nomadic clans beyond the major tribes, Tauren society historically included smaller hunting bands. Their key cultural elements were storytelling traditions, elder-based leadership, flexible camp structures. They shared oral history rather than written codices. The shift from many smaller camps to Thunder Bluff represented one of the biggest social evolutions in Tauren history. It required trust, surrender of some autonomy, and acceptance of centralized authority. And that's not a small ask, especially for so many different tribes having to go into one place. Their different ideologies and ways all mixing. Why the unification worked. The Tauren tribes came together because the Centaurs were relentless. Nomadic survival was no longer sustainable, and Karn provided calm authority. The Horde offered stability without demanding cultural erasure. They didn't have to get rid of what they were or who they were to help the Horde become what it was. Horde did not conquer the Tauren, it supported them. And the Bloodhoof tribe made the alliance formal. Why the Tauren joined the Horde? The classical framing. In classic timeline, the Tauren joined because Thrall respected shamanism. and for that, the Tauren respected him. The Horde presented itself as reformed. Thrall's new Horde was not like the old Horde. Orcs and Taurens shared reverence for strength tied to honor, and mutual survival benefits outweighed isolation. Keeping the two cultures separate could have caused even more strain for either one of the Tauren or the Orcs and trolls, because at this point the trolls are mixed in with the Orcs and Orgrimmar. It was pragmatic but also philosophical. The Tauren believed the Horde could become something better than its past. And in Classic Era, that belief still holds. So the Tauren are there to be that calming voice to, hey, we don't need to do that. Some of the core tribal themes in Classic, and we'll go through the tribes again, are, the Bloodhoof was unity. The Rune Totem tribe was the spiritual expansion. The Grim Totem tribe was the ideological tension. The Stonehoof tribe was the endurance. The Sky Chasers was the vigilance in that. The Wildmane was the martial strength, and the Winterhoof was the hardship resilience. Together they formed a layered society, not a monolith. And before we end, we're going to talk a little bit more about Karn. I did my notes, sorry. Are there any questions so far? Anybody got any questions in chat? So, Karn. He's the steady hand of the plains. There are quite a the minor tribes. You see some of them. I believe you see some of them in Mulgore while you're leveling in Classic, but you don't get the deep dive unless you read the books or scrolls that they have lying around. I don't think there are many, because it's more oral tradition. When we talk about the Tauren unifying, we're really talking about one individual whose strength was not loud, not reckless, not hungry for dominance, and it's Karn. In the Classic timeline, Karn is already an elder. He's not a rising hero. He is not a young revolutionary. He's a seasoned leader forged by years of retreat, defense, and hard choices. And that matters. So because Karn did not unite the Tauren through ambition, he united them through trust. Karn was born into the Bloodhoof tribe during the nomadic era of Tauren society, a time when the tribe still roamed the central plains of Kalimdor freely. The Tauren were hunters and, following the Kodos, herds across, the open grasslands. Survival required mobility, and camps rose and fell with the seasons. Tribal identity was fluid but strong. Karn was raised in oral tradition, the Earth Mother reverence, communal survival structures, and elder-led governance. He learned early that leadership was not dominance, it was responsibility. Something that other leaders would have to learn, quite quickly. I mean, Thrall had to learn. Among the Tauren, authority, it's not seized, it's recognized. Elders and warriors follow those who prove wisdom over time. Karn's rise was gradual. He earned respect through hunting prowess, calm decision-making under pressure, deep spiritual grounding, and a refusal to panic in crisis. By the time the Centaur threat intensified, Karn was already seen as steady. And steadiness was exactly what the Tauren needed then. So the Centaur crisis and the breaking point, for generations, the Centaur harassed Tauren tribes. But in the years leading up to Warcraft 3, and thus classic WoW, the Centaur became organized and relentless. They destroyed hunting grounds, disrupted migration routes, and slaughtered isolated camps. And they forced constant retreat. The Tauren weren't weak, they were divided. These tribes are scattered all over. Nomadic independence, once a strength, became a liability. Separate tribes could not coordinate large-scale defenses. Some of those minor tribes, they could have been wiped out if they weren't too careful. Karn saw something others did not. In the tribes, if the tribes continued to operate independently, they would have been wiped out. Unification was no longer philosophical, it was essential. His leadership style did not demand submission from other tribes. He traveled, he negotiated, he spoke with elders. He appealed not to fear, but to survival and shared identity. And this is crucial because, while these Centaur attacks are happening, he's not only he's defending, he's going to talk to these other tribe leaders. He did not conquer, like I said, he didn't conquer the other tribes in unity. He convinced them. The distinction defines Tauren culture. While Orcus unification historically involved war chiefs consolidating power through strength, Karn unified through persuasion and example. He embodied the Earth Mother's teachings. Strength in balance, endurance over aggression, patience under pressure. Other tribes followed him because they trusted him, not because they feared him. So when he met Thrall and the orcs arrived in Kalimdor, Karn was already attempting tribal coordination. He was trying to bring them together to take back, defend themselves against the Centaur. The Centaur nearly overwhelmed the Tauren, and Thrall's intervention changed everything. The orcs aided the Tauren against the Centaur, helping them push back the threat. Karn recognized something in Thrall immediately. He was a leader burdened by history. He was a shaman and not merely a warrior. And he saw a people seeking redemption. After the fallout of the old Horde, Thrall wanted that new Horde to be something better. And he wanted to redeem their past transgressions with honor. And Karn saw that Thrall's horde was not the same horde that once marched through the dark portal under demonic influence. That recognition mattered, and Karn didn't join the horde blindly. He evaluated Thrall's character, and once convinced of Thrall's sincerity, he made a decision that shaped Kalimdor forever. After the Centaur were pushed back, Karn made the boldest decision in Tauren history. He encouraged settlement. The founding of Thunder Bluff marked the transition from nomadic survival to centralized identity. And this was radical. Like I said before, going from a nomadic tribes, and unifying under one place, Thunder Bluff, it's a big deal for the Tauren. For generations, Tauren survival depended on mobility, and settling meant risks because the constant threat of the Centaur. Karn understood something critical. Unity requires proximity. And Thunder Bluff provided defensible elevations, and if anybody's played a Tauren in the starting areas or been to Thunder Bluff, missing that lift or falling, you died. You were dead. Created a centralized council space. So, you got the Rise of the Elders where, a bunch of the different Tauren are. It anchored tribal cooperation. And it preserved spiritual traditions in one place. The mesas symbolize stability. The lifts symbolize control access. There's only 2 lifts into Thunder Bluff. The open air represented Tauren connection to sky and land. Thunder Bluff is Cairn's philosophy made physical. Why he brought the Tauren into the Horde. He didn't see the Horde as saviors, he saw them as allies. The Tauren needed military partnership against the Centaurs. Thrall offered that. Thrall helped with that. Political stability in Kalimdor. And trade and shared defenses. The trade between the Orcs and the Tauren, it made everything better. I mean, the trade routes, you get the crossroads coming in, and we'll talk about that at another point in time, but crossroads is in between Orgrimmar and Thunder Bluff. The Horde needed that spiritual grounding. It needed the cultural balance and a reminder that strength must serve something greater. Karn believed the Tauren could help guide the Horde towards restraint. He was not naive. He knew the Orcs had a violent past, but he also believed in redemption. And that belief defines him. He's a big part of some of the Horde stuff in Classic WoW. In Classic, Karn acts as a senior advisor to Thrall. He's the moral counterweight in Horde discussions, and he's the diplomatic between tribes and races. He doesn't dominate Horde politics. He studies them. Karn's strength lies in his refusal to escalate unnecessarily. So, much like Thrall didn't want to go and wipe out the Quillbore, Karn was right there, be like, hey, good, let's not do that. We want to show them that we could live in peace if needed. He prefers dialogue over provocation, defense over expansion, balance over pride. And that influence keeps the early Horde more stable than it might have otherwise been. And how Karn truly united the Tauren. So he unified the Tauren through 5 core actions. Recognition that Centaur threat required collective response. Traveling between tribes personally to build trust. Like he traveled, like I said, personally between the tribes to build the trust. Demonstrating calm leadership during crisis. And if you play some of the stuff in the Barrens, there's a lot of Centaur activity. And the Tauren help, stop that from constantly happening. Well, the Horde, the orcs, helped the Tauren stop that. Supporting spiritual continuity while encouraging adaptation. Excuse me. And he formed a careful, deliberate alliance with the Horde. He didn't erase tribal identities. He preserved them under a shared banner. And this is why the unification held. What makes Karn unique in Warcraft leadership? Many leaders in Warcraft are remembered for conquest, dramatic speeches, battlefield heroics, and political maneuvering. Karn is remembered for steadiness, for patience, for listening. He's not flashy, he's foundational. And in the classic era, that foundation holds. Some leaders built empires, Karn built stability. Some leaders win wars, Karn prevented extinction. And sometimes that is the greater strength. This has been World of Warcraft lore, the Tauren. I think next week maybe we'll touch on I'm not sure what we're going to touch on. We'll all be surprised on what next week's episode is. I appreciate everybody for hanging out. And I hope you learned a little bit more about the Tauren. Be sure to check this out in the videos later if you're not watching it now. Go down the list, I guess. Yeah. I guess the next thing would probably be maybe we'll get into the Forsaken or I'm not done. I'm not done streaming Donut. We're going to swap up games. We're going to play some. I don't think I'd start with the Undercity first. I think I would start with the Forsaken and all that entails, which would get into the Alliance a little bit. But, and the Ruins of Lordaeron. We're going to go to our Spirit back screen because we're going to swap it up. We're going to swap some games. I'm going to continue my stream. I'm going to change the title. And in honor of National Trading Card Day, we're going to start the Dad Squad Gaming Trading Card Simulator, Trading Card Shop Simulator run. So give me a couple minutes and we will be back.